Programs or variables can contain lots of different types of data. In fact, variables can contain almost any type of thing in programming or in Python. But here are the 4 types that I'm going to start with, okay? And we need to know the difference between these things because it will impact how you do a program. The first type we've already played around with, called the string or string literal. It's just a list of characters. The list of characters always stays in that same order. It stays in that same case. And you can't actually change just one letter in that. You can replace that string with a different string in the variable, but there's no mechanism in Python for just changing. Let's say I wanted to capitalize this N. I can't change just that. I could replace it with a new string with a capital N, but I can't just change one character. Strings are very, very simple, and that's a good thing and a difficult thing. We will work with strings throughout this whole class, lots and lots. An integer is any number without decimals. So it's any whole number. It can be positive or negative. It can be 0. And for all intents and purposes into this class, it goes from infinity negative to infinity positive. Now, there are actual limitations for how big an integer can be in Python, but none of those are relevant to anything we're going to be doing in this class. So we're just not going to worry about it. For all intents and purposes, it's pretty infinite. But it's whole numbers. If I want a decimal or a partial number, like 13.985, it's a floating point number, also known as a float. So if I say we're going to create a float type variable, it's going to be holding numbers that are including decimals. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. If I create a float and I put the number 12 in it, in the mind of Python, the actual number that's in that variable is not just 12, it's 12.0. And if I print that out, it's going to say 12.0. Boolean values have to be either true or false. And by the way, it has to be capitalized, true or false. Python won't recognize it as a Boolean value if you don't capitalize true or false. Also notice that there's no quotes. It's not a string. It's actually literally true or false. Okay? Now, we have lots and lots of other data types. The next types that we're going to learn, in fact, in the next module, are list types. And those can actually contain more than one value. But for now, string, integer, floating point, or Boolean. So if I say, I want you to create a variable that is going to hold a GPA for a student, what would you name that variable, and what would the data type be? The kid's name? Now, what if my program was for a whole school full of students? I would probably just say GPA, right? So people would know what it is. And I'd probably, for now, start with all lowercase. But you're right, it would be a floating point because an integer wouldn't allow us to do like a 3.8 GPA. It would just say, it would round that to 3. Actually, not round it, it just drops the 0.8, which is even more dangerous. Yes, sir.
Is that why they have you do, like, when you're in elementary school, you have like a UID number? Because it's easier for the system to identify you?
That is actually true, yeah. And most programs that use databases have what's called a primary key or a unique identifier for each record in the database. But yeah, and I mean, even like our social security number is basically a unique ID number that the government uses to do things like make us pay taxes and keep track of aid that we receive from the government, all kinds of things. So it's somebody way back in history. I don't even know when the Social Security Administration actually started. I don't know the year, but when they started that, they said, "Hey, everybody needs a unique number so that we can make sure that the Bill Moseley that we think we're talking about is the Bill Moseley we are talking about." That was a good question. So, one thing that I recommend for this class, and it's not like a universal programming convention necessarily, a lot of people do this, but for the readability of your code and so that you're really clear about what you're doing, I would like to suggest that you use variable names that look like the following. So, if I have a string that's going to be somebody's name, I might write str lowercase and then a capital N name. No spaces, no underscores, but capitalizing each new word so that I know right away I can look at that variable and I know what data type is in there and I know what it is. It helps with the readability of your code. So int age is an integer that has somebody's age. Float GPA is how I would name a GPA, right? Float GPA. Sometimes I abbreviate float to just FL because I'm lazy. Programmers, you will discover, are infinitely lazy people. We're always looking for faster and shorter ways to do things, which is literally what drove Guido van Rossum to create Python in the first place. We create shortcuts for ourselves. Boolean, like if I write you a note that says, "Do you like me? Yes or no?" Boolean, like me, or true. So this way of capitalizing variable names has a name, and it's called camel case. Can you see why it's called camel case? Right? Because it's got humps in the middle. Every new word is capitalized. So if you read this is camel case. It's not too hard to read considering that there are no spaces between words. But if you read this with no capital letters, it's much more difficult to read, right? So this is hard to read because words run together. I can barely read it and I wrote it. So we use camel case. We start each variable with the name or with the type of data that it's going to be. And then we make the name something meaningful. Now, the other sort of pro tip here is you don't want your variable names to be super long. Like str, this is the variable I use for my first name. Because you will find yourself typing that over and over and over as you write your program. So there's a balance there. You want simplicity and brief variable names, but they also have to be fairly descriptive. So str first name, str last name, str age, that sort of thing. So I want you, before we move on from this, to revise your hello world. Where is that? To do something like this. Let's try this. We're going to say str greeting, and we're going to make that equal to a string. And then later, in the next line, we're going to print that greeting by putting the variable inside the print function. So we're printing the value of whatever the greeting is. So when you run that, it should print whatever you put inside the quotes. Now, the easiest way to check the value of any variable at any time during your program is to just print that variable. And it doesn't have to be a string. We can print anything in Python. So if I want to, I can create some other variables. Okay. So you'll notice on my Boolean variable, watch what happens if I leave that lowercase. It's going to mark this as an error because I put that lowercase true. Lowercase true is not a Boolean value. It has to be uppercase true or false. Lowercase, the error I'm getting is, hey, I can't find that variable. Because what it's doing when I put lowercase true like that is it's actually looking for a variable named true. So when I make it uppercase, it turns blue on this screen, which lets me know that it's a okay value. So here are all different things here, and I can do things like print my GPA. Even though it's a number, it still works. You can see down here. I can print my Boolean variable as well. Okay. So that's a useful way. Anytime I want to check and see what's in that container, all I do is print it, and it tells me what's in there. But a lot of our programs are going to involve printing variables and putting new things in these containers. Okay, so now you can make the computer do almost anything you want.